$1,000,000 if you can start that tank, old man.
He bet $1,000,000 on a man he had never met. He said it loud, with a grin on his face and a wireless mic half raised toward his mouth, so that every one of the 300 people standing on that grass heard him clearly. "I'll put $1,000,000 on the table," the general said, pointing one finger across the field, "that this old boy can't even find the starter on that tank." And the crowd laughed, because that is what a crowd does when a man with a star on his collar decides to be funny. The man he pointed at was 78 years old, easily 300 pounds, in a sweat-darkened polo shirt and a faded ball cap pulled low, and he just kept walking the line of restored vehicles as if he had not heard a single word. That tank had been dead all weekend. Seized, silent, towed onto the field on Friday, and sitting there like a beached grey whale ever since, while a crew of young reenactors and a couple of off-duty mechanics climbed all over it, cursing and sweating and getting nothing but the dry click of a starter that would not catch. The general had been told all of this. That is exactly why he made the joke. He figured there was no safer bet on earth than betting against a fat old man and a machine nobody could wake. If you have ever been written off by somebody who never earned the right to judge you, type steady in the comments right now and leave it there, because you are going to want it before this is over. His name was Earl Mercer, and almost nobody at that show knew it. He had driven down from 2 counties over in a truck older than most of the volunteers, paid his $8 at the gate like everyone else, and spent the morning the way he spent most of his Saturdays now, moving slowly between the half-tracks and the jeeps and the big pattern sitting dead in the sun, one hand resting on a cane he did not really lean on, the other tucked into the pocket of his work pants. He did not talk much. His knees were bad, and his back was worse, and the heat made his shirt cling to him, and he knew exactly what people saw when they looked at him, because he had seen it on their faces for 20 years. They saw an old man who ate too much and moved too slow, and probably had a story he told too often. They did not see the 19-year-old who once buttoned himself into a steel box the size of a kitchen, and went looking for other steel boxes in the dark. Earl had a habit of letting people believe whatever was easiest for them. It had never once been worth the trouble of correcting them, so when the general's voice rolled across the field and the laughter rose up behind it, Earl did not flinch, and he did not turn around. He just stopped in front of the dead tank, looked at it the way you look at an old dog that has gone grey around the muzzle, and said quietly to the nearest volunteer, "Mind if I climb up?" The volunteer, a kid of maybe 22, with a reproduction patch on his shoulder and greased to the elbow, did not know what to do with that. They had been trying to start this thing since Friday afternoon. They had checked the batteries, checked the fuel, checked the linkages, pulled panels, and put them back, called a man who knew a man, and nothing. And now here was the heaviest gentleman on the property, asking to climb onto a 50-ton vehicle in 90-degree heat. But the general was already walking over with his entourage and his grin, and a crowd was gathering because a crowd can smell a spectacle, and somebody decided it would be easier to just let the old fellow have his moment and laugh him back down. "Sure, Pop," the kid said. "Take your time getting up there." More laughter. Earl took his time. He set the cane against the road wheel, and he climbed. Slow, deliberate, both hands, one boot at a time, on the fender, and then the hull and the climbing alone took long enough that the general filled the silence with another joke about hip replacements that the crowd was kind enough to enjoy. Earl reached the top, lowered himself down into the commander's hatch until only his head and shoulders showed, and then he did the thing that made the whole field go quiet for the first time all weekend. He pulled a folded blue shop rag out of his back pocket, shook it open, and tied it across his eyes. "What in the world is he doing?" the general said, and for the first time the grin slipped a little, because a man making a joke wants to be the one in. And Earl had just taken the joke somewhere he could not follow. Earl did not answer him, Down inside that hole in a dark he had made for himself, his hands had already started to move. People up top could not see them. But the kid hanging off the side could, and the kid would later tell anybody who would listen that it was the strangest, surest thing he ever watched. Those thick old fingers walking across the panel without a second of hesitation, the way your own hand finds the light switch in your own house at 3 a.m. He was not searching, he was confirming. His palm passed over the master switches and stopped. His thumb found the fuel shut off and felt that it sat a hair short of where it needed to be, the one thing the crew had set by the book and the eye, and the one thing that was wrong by a quarter inch you could only catch by feel. He seated it home. His hand moved to the gear range and made sure of neutral, and the whole time his lips were moving, not for the crowd, just for himself, running an order he had run 10,000 times before any of these people were born. If you have ever been the quietest one in the room and known something nobody around you knew, comment still sharp right now, because here is where the field stops laughing for good. He hit it, and the AVD's 1790 came up out of its long sleep the way those big air-cooled diesels do, a deep cough, a shudder that ran through 50 tons of steel and into the souls of everyone standing too close, and then a roar that rolled out across the show field and bounced off the tree line and came back. Black smoke punched out of the exhaust and hung in the air. Birds went up out of the trees, and the tank that had been dead for 3 days sat there at a steady, idle, breathing, alive, with a blindfolded 78-year-old man on top of it who had not so much as flinched. Nobody laughed. The general's mouth was open and no sound was coming out. The kid was just staring, and Earl reached up slow and unbothered, untied the rag from his eyes, blinked once in the sunlight, folded the rag along its old creases, and put it back in his pocket like a man who had finished a small chore. She was just hungry, he said. To no one in particular. Fuel cut-off wasn't all the way seated. Easy to miss with your eyes, hard to miss with your hands. And that was the joke, the whole bet, the easy money, sitting there idling in front of 300 people, and the general's $1 million grin gone clean off his face. Now the bet was over. The old man had won it without ever agreeing to it, and a fair-minded crowd was already murmuring the way crowds do when the wrong person gets humbled. The general could have laughed it off, could have walked over and shaken the man's hand and made himself look bigger by losing well. He was, for the record, not a cruel man, just a peacetime staff officer who had spent his career around briefing slides and motor pools he never climbed inside, a man who genuinely believed he had been making a harmless joke. He was already halfway to working out an apology in his head, but before he could get a word of it out, a black SUV came up the access road faster than the speed limit on that grass allowed, and a man got out of it in his shirt sleeves, with 2 stars on his collar and a face like he had seen a ghost, and the 1-star general straightened up so fast it would have been funny on any other day. Because the man crossing that field outranked him, and the man crossing that field was not looking at the tank at all, he was looking at Earl Sergeant Mercer. He said it from 20 feet out, and his voice cracked on the second word. Earl. Halfway down off the hull by then, went still. I have been looking for you, the 2-star said. For 11 years. His name was Major General Sam Doyle, and the field did not know yet why a 2-star with a service record as long as your arm had driven across a county, at lunch on a Saturday, to stand in the grass and look up at a fat old man with tears starting in his eyes. So Doyle told them, because some debts have to be paid out loud. He told them that on the 3rd of March 1969, at a place most of them had never heard of, called Ben Het, a special forces camp out near where Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia all run together, the North Vietnamese sent tanks down a road in the dark, the only time the whole war that American tanks fought enemy tanks. And the man who answered them was a 22-year-old tank commander in the 1st Battalion, 69th Armour, fighting nearly blind, picking targets out of muzzle flashes and the shape of the dark, who put a round into an enemy tank by feel and instinct when the night gave him almost nothing to see by. The crowd was silent now in a different way. That man could run his tank in the dark, Doyle said, because he had to, because one night it was the only thing that kept his crew alive. And then he stopped and gathered himself and put the rest of it on the table. A few weeks after Ben Het, he said Sergeant Mercer's tank took an RPG. It started to burn. He got out, he was clear, and he went back in. Into a burning tank for his loader, who was pinned and unconscious and was not going to get himself out. He dragged that man up through the hatch with his bare hands, and he got burned doing it, and he never once put himself in for a thing. That loader came home. He got old. He had a family. Doyle's voice was barely holding now. He had a son, and that loader was my father. He died 4 years ago, in his own bed, surrounded by his grandchildren, 56 years after a night he should not have walked away from, and the only reason any of us ever got to exist is the man standing in front of me, who I have been trying to find since the day my father told me his name. He looked up at Earl, and he stopped being a general for a second, and was just a son. He talked about you every year on the 3rd of March. He said you never told anybody. He said that was the most you thing about you. And Earl Mercer, who had not taken a $1 million bet, and had not corrected a single person who underestimated him in 20 years, stood there in the grass with one hand on the warm steel of a tank, just like the one he had crawled back into, and he could not say a word. The one-star general took his hat off. He did it slowly, the way you do a thing you understand you should have done sooner, and he walked over, and he did not offer the easy handshake or the loud apology he had been rehearsing. He came to attention in front of a man in a sweat-stained polo shirt, and he held the salute, and he held it until it meant something. And one by one across that field, the old men in the crowd who knew what a salute costs and what it pays, stood up out of their lawn chairs and did the same, and then the young volunteers who had laughed an hour ago, and then people who had never served a day and only understood that they were standing in front of something true. Earl, who had never wanted any of this, looked at all of them, and then he did the only thing left that he knew how to do. He climbed back up onto the tank. He lowered himself into the hatch one more time, settled his hands on the controls in the daylight, this time eyes open, and he let that big engine sit there, an idle, steady, patient, a sound like a slow heartbeat rolling out over the field, and he let it talk for him the way it always had. They never did sort out the $1 million, and nobody ever expected to. But the general, who turned out to be a better man than his joke, made some calls that week, and the next spring that restored pattern ran in the show's opening ceremony with Earl Mercer riding the commander's hatch and a small brass plate freshly bolted to the hull with a date on it, the 3rd of March, and one line that just said the crew comes first. Major General Doyle stood at the rope line every year after that, with his own children beside him, telling them whose hands had bought their whole family its life, until telling it stopped feeling like grief and started feeling like inheritance. And Earl kept showing up the way he always had. Slow and heavy and easy to overlook, paying his $8 at the gate, resting one hand on a cane he didn't need, letting people believe whatever was easiest. Because the men who have nothing to prove are almost never the ones doing the talking. So if you have ever underestimated the quiet one, the heavy one, the slow one, the old one in the cheap shirt at the edge of the crowd, and learned the hard way that still water runs deeper than you ever guessed, then subscribe to this channel and keep that engine running, because there are a lot more men like Earl out there, sitting silent in the sun, just waiting to be asked if they'd mind climbing up. Most of them will never tell you what they did. You'll have to be the kind of person who knows enough to ask, and the next time some loud voice points across a field and bets $1 million on what an old man can't do, remember the sound that came up out of that dead machine, steady as a heartbeat, after everybody else had given up on it. Some men learned to run in the dark a long time ago. They never forget how,